entity in detail. In Visual Paradigm, you can specify the detail of the entity through the specification dialog box. You specify the entity detail for following reasons. You need to construct the database, so you need more information for not just displaying on the screen. You need to generate to specific database engine, so you need to specify the detail. And also you can maintain the common understanding of the entity. So you can specify something like a type and the length of the type. Then any people in your team can understand we got this entity or this column in specific detail. And the third purpose usually is you need to keep the record. The software development is not just one-off activities. It is on and ongoing. So if you specify the detail correctly, when you come back, you can check it out, why we have such design or why we come to this point. So how to open the specification dialog box? It is very easy. You just right click on the entity and then select the open specification menu item in the pop-up menu. Or there's another shortcut. When you select the entity, you can click the enter. You can just hit the enter key. Then you will see the specification dialog box like this for the entity. Let's walk through some important properties in the specification dialog box. First is of course you have the name, but the first property below the name is called domain. Domain is a name set of properties that can be reused by any entities. Okay, it's very abstract. Let's give an example. For example, you have a log. You can define the log as a domain, and when the entity apply the log domain, it will come along with all the properties you set. For example, where the schema it is, or what columns included. For example, you also have the transactions that can be used as a domain. Then when you set the table as a transaction, then you will have all these columns come along with your entity. Let me just show you how to define the domain in Visual Paradigm. Here I have an empty Visual Paradigm project, an empty relationship diagram. I just create an entity. I say this is a photo log, for example. It's used for store the log of the photo. Then I can right click and open the specification. Now the dialog show up and I can go to the domain. I can configure the domains. And now it's empty, of course, because this project is empty. Then I add. Now I go to the domain. I can define this as a log. Then I can specify the schema or things like that. Then I focus on the column. I can create a column. For the log, I will have the log time, which is the property. The type is time. And I also have the description, event description. And this is a kind of varchar. I define 255. And then it's okay. Now I have the log domain. Then I can specify the log domain on it. After you specify the log, you will see the column will be created. So in the future, if I create another entity, say this is a member log, then I right click, go to the specification, and I apply the same domain log. Then you will see it also come along with all the columns required. And the best things is if you change the log domain, all the related entities will be updated accordingly. So you don't need to go through every log table and then add the columns you want. Okay, let's come back to the slide. To use the domain, it is used to maintain a commonly entered value or descriptions that you can use in different entity, and it is reuse it in other entity when you need it. I just demonstrate to you. So the benefit is save time in create similar entities like log transactions, and other benefit is to keep the data model consistent. Then the second property we look for is a full text index. This property is only available in Microsoft SQL Server. So if you specify this property, it's only effective when you generate MS SQL. And the definition is used to specify the field which can run in the full text engine, just like a search engine. Then when you query on specific text, it is very effective. For more detail, you can visit Microsoft website you see on the bottom of the slide. Discriminator column. It is a very specific for object to relationship mapping. When you decide the database, it's used to store the data. But when you're doing the programming, you need to load the data into the memory in order to do your work. So you will have a corresponding class diagram in your memory when you're doing object-oriented programming. In Visual Product, we can generate both the class and the database for you, and we use an open source object persistent framework called Hibernate, which is very powerful and very popular. The idea is you decide either the class or the entity, then we can help you to synchronize. The discriminator column is used to solve one problem. When you're doing the class, when you're drawing the class diagram, you define the class hierarchy. You can use the generalization to specify the superclass and subclass. This is an example that we have a photo class and we have a different subclasses for different properties and different behavior. We have a wildlife and the landscape and event. You define it in the class diagram, and during the programming, it is very natural. But how about the database? We need to save this object to the database. To solve this problem, we can put all these classes into a single table called photo. So it includes all the attributes in different subclasses. And how to distinguish this entity, this row is correspond to which objects in your memory. We need a discriminator column. So the idea is something like that. When you save in database, you have the art museum, then it is a landscape. You define landscape. So when you load up into the memory, we will load the landscape objects rather than the wildlife or event. And if you take an Olympic game, this is a kind of event. So the engine will understand when we reach this row, we will return the event object to you rather than the landscape or wildlife. So it is so powerful, the discriminator column. By definition, the discriminator column is used to store the value to identify the type which belong to which class. To use it, it's easy. You just select the column as a discriminator column and make sure after you specify this column, the ERD is synchronized with the class diagram. We have another lecture talk about the synchronization of ERD and class diagram. And you will set the value when insert the data into database. If you use the Hibernate framework, you don't need to care to set this value because the Hibernate will set for you. Version column. The version column also used exclusive for Hibernate. It is used for hold the version number. It is a number value for Hibernate to do the locking. If you load it up in different thread and you write it to avoid overwriting each other, it used it for the locking. And the usage is simple. You just select the column to store the version number. and then store the version data when generate the ORM. And again, the Hibernate will help you to do this. The schema. The schema is to define the container to store this entity in your database engine. So it is a logical container like a package. The schema, when you set it, it only effective when you generate database. If you decide the ELD for logical or conceptual idea, then you don't need to define the schema. It's just for generate database. So use the schema. You just need to go to the schema value and then type in. The schema field will have the compression support. So if you define like the core before, then you define another entity, you can see the core. You can see the core in the list, so you avoid mistake typing. The data model. We talk about a conceptual model, logical model, and physical model. In one diagram, you can specify it as a logical or conceptual. If you want, you can specify different entity in same diagram for different logical model. You can specify it as a conceptual, is a summary level. A logical, it is fully attributed and normalized it. And the physical is for ready to generate the database. The table space. The table space is only available for Oracle. So if you generate to another database engine like MySQL or MS SQL, it isn't effective. The table space is a logical locations where to store your table in the Oracle DB. And this is a kind of database generation property. To use it is simple. You just define the table space lookup, and then you can select the table space. And it's better to use the lookup rather than type it in. The reason is if you type it wrong, you will put it in the wrong table space, which is not you expected. And the DDL course. The DDL course is a data definition language. It is the syntax for define the data structure. So it's just like the create table, drop table, order table. And the DDL course you define here will be append to the end of the generated statement, generated data DDL when we generate database. So you can write something like on commit, delete rows, things like that. This is for specific database. It's based on which database you use. You need to write the correct syntax on that. And finally, the description. If you have attend our official program essential training course, you know what is the descriptions. The descriptions is used to describe the table in a detail in a textual form. The description text you write here will be used in generate the data dictionary. The data dictionary is a kind of document that for the developer or the database admin to understand the data structure. So the description will be generated there, and it's for documenting the database. So when someone look at your table and want to know what this table used it for, instead of walk through each columns and guess what it is, he just need to read the description and understand what it is. Let's summarize this lecture. We talk about how to open the entity specification, and I walk through various properties for the entity. Thank you very much for attending this lecture. See you soon in the coming lecture.